Out of absolutely nowhere, with no medical history and no family history and no indication anything was wrong, had a massive brainstem stroke and very, very nearly died. It was from the rupture of an AVM, which is an arterial venous malformation. It's kind of like a really, really intense aneurysm. Actually, this AVM had 4 aneurysms on it and was abutting my brainstem. So a brave surgeon operated for 16 hours.
Wow.
And saved my life by removing it. It would be 2.5 months before I regained consciousness.
Okay.
And even then, still could not speak, could not eat food, could not walk or stand, anything. So I was very, very bad off for a very long time.
This is the Made to Advance podcast. I'm your host, Brian Aulick. We're here to inspire and equip you for your best future. Welcome, everybody. It is so great to have you with us. And before we get started, I want to ask you a favor. If you have been encouraged by Made to Advance, I want to ask you to subscribe or review. That just helps us get more of the great guests on the show that we have had to date. And one of those guests I've been looking forward to for a long time to this conversation. My wife, Christina, said she had listened to a podcast that Katherine Wolf was on, our guest today. And she said, Brian, you have to have a conversation with Katherine. It's an absolute must. And so I said, okay. And then one day I was driving to perform a wedding. And I thought, well, I'll start to listen to some of Katherine's story. Well, I'm getting ready for this moment where I have to be composed at this wedding, and all of a sudden I am driving my car sobbing as I'm thinking about the significance of the vows that I'm about to put in front of the couple to be married. And so I'm very, very excited to have Katherine on today. She and her husband, Jay, have authored 2 books. She has a new book that has just come out. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They founded an amazing ministry called Hope Heals, and you can find more about them at hopeheals.com. But Katherine, welcome to Made to Advance. I'm so glad to be able to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I suspect that most people will not know much of your story, and so I thought we would just start at I don't want to say the very beginning, but kind of back it up a little bit. So you and Jay moved out to LA in 2004, and what took you? I know you met in college, but what took you to LA in the first place?
Yeah. We moved to Los Angeles after being college sweethearts, marrying right away. Because Jay was going to Pepperdine Law School.
Okay.
And I was doing something called commercial print modeling, which isn't really modeling. It's just being in commercials and doing Disney catalogs and, just kind of silly entertainment industry stuff. It wasn't a calling, but it was paying the bills. And Jay was in law school, and I had a little baby along the way, and we were 26 years old. He was 6 months old. Our lives changed.
It sounds very impressive to say you're in LA and using the word modeling and LA. It all sounds very exciting.
Totally. It wasn't glamorous at all, but yeah, it sounds that way for sure. I wasn't actually really the part at all. I'm definitely not big model material, but I do have one skill, which is the art of conversation. So inevitably, I would make friends with the casting director, and they'd book me. So I talked to my children about the value of being conversationalists. Is up there with everything you do in life.
Boy, that is a great word and so very true. You can be really smart at things or really good at things, but if you don't know how to get to know people and have conversations, you're gonna struggle a little bit. Well, you're out there in LA, and Jay's in law school, and all these things are happening. You have a child now, and then something very traumatic happens that really changes the trajectory of your story. Tell us about that, if you would.
Absolutely. Out of absolutely nowhere with no medical history and no family history and no indication anything was wrong, had a massive brainstem stroke and very, very nearly died. It was from the rupture of an AVM, which is an arterial venous malformation. It's kind of like a really, really intense aneurysm. Actually, this AVM had 4 aneurysms on it and was abutting my brainstem. So a brave surgeon operated for 16 hours
Wow.
and saved my life by removing it.
Wow. So just out of nowhere, all of a sudden your life is totally different. Now, when you, after the surgery, are you immediately able to kind of converse and talk? What state are you in right after that? That's a massive surgery.
Not at all.
Okay.
No. It would be 2.5 months before I regained consciousness.
Okay.
And even then, still could not speak, could not eat food, could not walk or stand, anything. So I was very, very bad off for a very long time.
How long you've been through so much rehab to learn and really relearn to do all of those things. So how long did that rehab journey take?
So I lived in a rehab facility after the initial 6 months in the hospital for another 1.5 years. And it would be 11 months before I could eat food again. It would be 18 months before I could stand up and slowly relearn to walk. And everything has been a very, very slow process to regain. But I have regained so much, and yet not so much. If you were to see me in the grocery store, I use a wheelchair, and I have a hand that doesn't work, and my face is paralyzed, and my eyes don't track. And, I have a number of significant deficits, but everything is so much better than it was immediately after the stroke.
Do you still have to do rehab type things today, or is it more now after all the work you've done, you live off of those results and investments?
It's both. So sadly, I've had several bouts of intense physical therapy post-stroke because of accidents. I took a bad fall several years ago and tore my ACL, MCL, and meniscus. So I had to have a lot of physical therapy in that season to learn to reuse on that knee after surgery to replace the ACL. And so there's been a lot of seasonal physical therapy, but now I know all the maintenance routines necessary and can really do a lot on my own as far as therapy.
Okay. Well, and just so our listeners have a sense for this, I recall hearing, and I'm not going to do a good job of getting it just right, but there was a procedure you had that involved, it was like a transplant of a muscle to your face, or do you know what I'm talking about?
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's called what is it called? Cross-facial nerve something. Basically, they took a muscle from my inner thigh and implanted it in my face to help with the facial droop and a number of issues connected to the facial droop affecting my eye long term. So actually, I have a thigh muscle in my face, which is why it protrudes kind of and sticks out funny.
Interesting, but gave you more functionality, or at least control.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So you've been through a lot of procedures and treatment and all these different things. Mm-hmm. And yet your story is so remarkable because you've just continued to let God use you through all of this. And one of the things that I think when I've heard you share, and I've heard you share in multiple places now, it's been once I heard you share once, I thought, okay, this is, just hearing your perspective, it's very contagious.
Yeah.
One of the things that's just so powerful is to hear how you have how you have let your perspective shape how you go through challenging things. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about the power of perspective.
Absolutely. I've loved that. And you're right. The power of perspective is everything, because For instance, for me, things were so bad early on that it's given me perspective when things are moderately better in any category. And that's been such a gift. Also, the perspective of being in a group therapy session for years with people in horrific situations provided such a valuable perspective for me. And thankfully, my faith has always been important to me since I was a child. And so the Jesus lens on my story has been a part of how I've coped with this reality. And just seeing that God's at work in this story, even in this hard story, he's working.
Was that something that, particularly in the early days, was leaning into your faith difficult for you from the standpoint of how could God allow this to happen, or was it easy for you to say, I don't understand it, but God, I know you're with me in it? How did you interpret that? So many people walk away from faith or have a really difficult time with God after they experience something difficult.
Yeah, I definitely didn't walk away from my faith by any means, but I think I did begin to wonder after about the first 6 months when nothing was working in my body. I began to wonder if God made a mistake by leaving me on earth, and should I have died and not be here, and I did not fit in this world anymore, and could this be God in this, and has he forgotten me? And thankfully, I really felt from everything I've ever known of Scripture a deep understanding, and landed on the recognition that God doesn't make mistakes, and he is at work way beyond what I may be able to see or understand. And he knows best in every situation. And he is writing a story through my life that may contain difficult chapters, but it's a really good story he's writing, and I can trust that. And I also honestly felt very much in my lowest points a supernatural sense that God had chosen me for this life. And it was a deeply settling feeling that I could trust in his plan for my story.
Wow.
And that if I should have died, I would have died, but I didn't die. I'm here. So I have breath in my lungs, and the Lord obviously has stuff for me to do in the land of the living. So I really leaned into that.
I love that. And what's so important about your story is it sounds like you and Jay were really walking with the Lord closely before any of this happened. So you really were standing on a legacy of faith before you went in. And I think that God used that as you were processing all of these challenges. When you started really coming to terms with God has me here for a reason. He is writing his story. He's got a good plan for my life still. How did that start to play out, practically speaking? There's first the shift in perspective. Okay, he has me here. He's rescued my life. But then you started having to think practically, okay, what is next then? And tell me what was next as you started inviting him to use you in this new context.
Yeah, well, at the beginning, it was all about relearning and working in therapy and getting to a new baseline. And we didn't know what I would recover and would not. And the focus of my life was rehab, and also trying to reintegrate to my life and be a young mother and care for my son again. So initially, there was just kind of survival mode, I would say. And then after much time had passed, actually, I would say like the first 5 years, I slowly began to come up for air and just be able to write and speak more and more and more about my journey and sort of the lessons God was teaching me in this darkness.
Wow. So you really started once you had recovered some of that functionality, and you were able to just kind of manage life as a mom and a wife again. That's when you started being able to share your message a little bit more. And when you think about, I mean, I don't know if your message, you feel like it's changed or evolved much, or if it's for some, God gives us this core message, and that's what we really hang on to. What were those early days like, as far as what was the message that you were speaking into people's lives?
The message I was speaking into people's lives, you're meaning once I started really publicly speaking, or you meaning like in the brain rehab?
No, once you started publicly speaking.
Oh, I would say, well, then and now, I am screaming to whoever will listen to hold on. That our worst moment is not the end of the story. And God has things for us in every season. And our lives are not just simply one thing that happens. The worst day is not the last day. And that God is at work and can be trusted. And that we can do really hard things. Mm-hmm. That He supplies everything we need, and that His divine power has given us everything we need already, and that He works and His strength works through our weakness, and that God's really got us exactly where we are for a reason. And ultimately, the Ephesians 4:1 notion that we are to live a life worthy of the calling that we've received. So I would say that kind of my message in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, that's a great summary, because I've heard you share it and have more time to share it at greater length. But what's part of what's so powerful about your message is how you and Jay have chosen to live that out, hey, we're going to choose to not just be a victim of our circumstances, but to invite God in the fullness of His power and His promises to us. We're going to live into that. Tell us a little bit about what your and Jay's ministry looks like today, because you're involved in so many things. You're making a difference in so many people's lives.
Oh, we are so incredibly thankful. For Hope Heals, for our ministry, we have an incredible camp called Hope Heals Camp, where we invite families where someone has a disability to come to camp totally for free and enjoy a retreat-like experience week with the full family. And it is just unreal, so special. And now we have a new coffee shop and retail concept in Atlanta called Mend, MEND, not men coffee, Mend. And we, just have that brick and mortar manifestation of hope, and get to really introduce Atlanta to an interability community where we employ people with disabilities to work and have an entirely universally designed space so people can be customers who are dealing with disabilities of all different kinds.
Wow, what a beautiful vision. When did that get started?
I would say probably in the last 8 years, it's kind of all come together. Okay. And we don't know what the future holds. We have 10,000 ideas always, and really want to honor the Lord before taking a step. But it's hard because we're creatives.
Yeah. And the coffee shop, Jay told me, was in the Buckhead area of Atlanta. Yes. So for anybody listening, if you're in the Buckhead area, you need to look up Mend Coffee. That sounds like an incredible place to visit. And when you're talking about creating environments where people of differing abilities, and I was the term interability? Is that what you used?
Okay. We feel called to create sacred spaces of belonging and belovedness for friends affected by disability, in the context of interability community.
I love that. And one of the things I've heard you say is you've used this term wheelchair bound versus wheelchair free. And yes. I think that is I've never heard anybody say anything like that before. And maybe you could just unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I believe, first of all, that we all have wheelchairs. Some have them on the outside, and all of us have them on the inside. We all have invisible wheelchairs. And I feel like the Lord revealed to me some years ago that I'm not wheelchair bound. I'm not bound by my wheelchair because I'm not held back by that limitation. It's actually enabling me to live my life. It's pushing me forward. The wheelchair allows me to live in freedom, that I'm wheelchair free. And so I love to talk about the reality. If we all have invisible wheelchairs, could it be possible that we are wheelchair free?
Wow. I love that. And it's such a good reminder that it's not your disabilities are a little bit more noticeable from the outside.
Yes.
But the reality is we all have different kinds of limitations we're wrestling with. And this is where your example is so inspiring to me of saying, with the help of God, I'm not going to let my limitations stop me from whatever God's calling is in my life. And it's just so encouraging and motivating. You were talking about, I was listening to you just share once about camp, and it was a very powerful story. You talked about having a conversation with a younger camper who asked you some details about how things work at home, and specifically with regard to the bathroom. How are you, and it's a weird thing for me to bring up here on the podcast, but you said it very publicly, so I feel like it's probably okay.
Oh, please, not at all.
To bring that up, and you've got your kids at home, your boys, and
right.
Tell me about that story. Maybe you could recount it. It was moving.
I think I know which story you're talking about, but interrupt me if this is not what you're meaning. I had a sweet young mother who also had a stroke come to our camp who had young sons. And I can remember her story was very similar to mine. So here I was ready to talk to her about all deep theological questions of suffering. And, I'm ready for the heavy hitters. Let's talk God's sovereignty. Let's go deep with free will and so many of these things. And she told me, Katherine, I've been wanting to ask you this question. I've come from Oregon to ask you this. And I said, oh, goodness, what? And she said, since I'm the mother of young boys as well, when I use a public restroom and my husband has to help me, what do you do with your young sons when you're in public? And I looked at her and I was just floored, like of all things to ask me, that was just so, it was so simple and such humanity. I don't know how to do this life. And I don't know what to do with my little boys when I have to go to the bathroom. And it was just this beautiful, it was so much deeper than about the bathroom.
Right.
It was just a deep sense of, I understand and I'm with you. And there's camaraderie in this nightmare. And that is what, the campers at our camp get to give each other, as we are a part of disrupting the deep lie that joy only comes when life is pain-free. That we are a part of being joy rebels, I call it, that we're a part of rebelling to the deep darkness with joy in the story.
Oh, that's so good. I hope our listeners are taking all of this to heart. Could you say it again? And I've heard you say it before, but could you say it again, the lie of the about being pain-free?
Oh, absolutely. I think what so many of our campers are doing who have clear disabilities on the outside, there's no denying things are difficult in their stories, but it enables freedom because there's no hiding. Life is not perfect. It's clear. So what we get to do is start at that baseline and disrupt the lie that joy can only be found in a pain-free life, because that's simply not true.
And your life is such a great example of that. That's where, as I said in my introductory comments, going into this wedding that I was going to be performing and knowing the significance of the vows that this couple was about to take, and having walked through my own wife having cancer and going through multiple surgeries and all these different things, you just feel the weight of what those words mean in a different way. And that's where I feel like it's so encouraging to see you and Jay have taken those vows many years ago now and live them out with such joy and such a contagious spirit that's inspiring to me. You've written a couple of books with Jay that are available, and would encourage our listeners to check those out. But you have a new book coming out that you wrote with you co-wrote it with your sister. So tell me about this book.
Right here, can you see that? Treasures in the Dark. And this book is kind of a devotional style. I call it Reflections, a reflection guide of taking people in the midst of deep hurting and eventually healing and eventually hoping on a journey of encouragement in their deep darkness.
I think it is such a great idea that the two of you wrote this book, because as a pastor, I've walked with so many folks when they're going through suffering, and you need a guide, or it's so helpful to have a guide or someone who's walked that path, even if it's not the same circumstances. So I'd imagine this book can be a real tool for those of us either who are suffering or who know someone who is suffering, to give that as a gift, as an encouragement to someone who's really speaking it from a personal level. Now, why did you write it with your sister? What was behind that choice?
My sister-in-law, Jay's baby sister, is 10 years under than us, but has really been a huge part of this story, our lives, our ministry, all of it from the beginning. She's also been the director of our camp and is just a brilliant, deep well of important thoughts of how suffering and Jesus intersect in our stories.
Okay, gotcha. Sounds like she is a gift to your family and to your ministry.
Oh, absolutely, she is, and it's it's really interesting when, for instance, Alex has been in the position to watch up close thousands of people at this point in all our years of Hope Hills Camp going through like unimaginable suffering, horrific, burying family members. We've had multiple campers die. It's really a community of deep pain and loss, and just wrestle. We've watched so many just wrestle in the darkness, living stories they could have never imagined surviving, and watching them walk through terrible, deep grief and sorrow, but also experience joy and peace and celebration, even in the midst of just horror and sadness.
Well, that's such a beautiful picture of what the kingdom of God is all about, to be able to invite Jesus into our most painful places. And somehow he can still bring joy and hope and peace, and use us in the process. And that doesn't mean we don't grieve deeply, and we have to own up to all of the challenges and pains that our circumstances can bring. But it is such a testimony to the risen Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit that he can bring beauty out of ashes. And I just want to say I so appreciate your example and your willingness, and you and Jay's willingness together to live out this example. There's such a culture, a kind of a culture in our, I don't know if it's just limited to our country, where when you go through really difficult things, it can be very tempting to check out, to be obsessed with what did not happen and how unfair whatever it is, is. And I think you and Jay have said, we serve a sovereign God who loves us, who has a good plan for our lives, even if it looks unlike what we would have ever dreamt or imagined. And
the reality. Oh, yeah. The reality is so many of us in our lives play the what if game. What if this would have happened? What if that would have happened? What if I would have done this or married this person or seen this doctor? And the reality is that it's this terrible loop we get on, and it's traumatizing and paralyzing. And I believe the way off the what if loop is hope. Hope is the escape hatch. It's our way out. Hope gives us permission to live our actual lives. And the question moves from what if to what is in the story. And how do we live the what now, the what is, and live into this specific story and move forward. They say you never move on. That's not real. You don't ever move on. You move forward and you carry it with you. It's all about not letting go, but letting in the deep sorrow and grief and being able to move forward with it, carrying it.
I'm curious, Katherine, and we'll close on this. Of all of the different passages of the Bible that no doubt have been an encouragement to you in your journey, is there any one that stands out above them all as one that has meant just kind of particularly been important to you and to your ministry and journey?
Yeah, goodness, it's really hard to narrow it down. I have found in my journey, I mean, I love all of Romans. Goodness, I love Romans 8. But in Romans 5, 3-5, I think that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope, and hope will not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts by the power of the Holy Spirit who is at work within us. I have felt such a comfort in that, but not because of the reasons I understood before my stroke, for different reasons. Now I recognize that's not something you arrive at. It's not like you start with suffering and then you finally get to hope and one and done. It's so you can go back into the ongoing cycle of hurt with an ongoing hope because you will never be put to shame. So you're equipped for the next cycle, this side of heaven, of hurting, but you live differently in the hurting because of the ongoing healing and hoping that's happening. So I'd say Romans 5, 3-5.
Oh, that's so good. And such a good reminder of that we look at life as if we can just get through this thing so we can get to this dreamland state. And I love what you're saying on God equips us through this season of difficulty. He helps us grow. He helps us experience greater joy and greater hope. And then we're ready to walk through the next thing that he calls us to. And there usually is a next thing coming this side of heaven. So, Katherine, thanks so much for being on Made to Advance today. Thank you for your ministry and for the way that you're faithfully inviting Jesus to use you in the world. And I know you're touching many people's lives. If you have not read any of Katherine's books, I want to encourage you to check them out, including the newest one. They're all available on Amazon, and you will be encouraged greatly. But Katherine, thank you so much for being on Made to Advance.
Oh, goodness, what a blessing to be with you. And yes, let's all advance. Let's advance towards the kingdom and live differently. So I love your work. Thank you.
Amen. I sure hope you enjoyed Katherine's story today. Every time I listen to her share, now I've heard her on multiple occasions, she just reminds me I don't have to be limited to my circumstances, to my weaknesses, to my limitations. I can invite God into all of those things, and he can do far more than I could ask or imagine. And I want to just encourage you, because the truth of the matter is we all face limitations, and it may be that you are suffering mightily even right now. And don't be tempted to think, oh, well, my suffering isn't as great as Katherine's. We all have our own kind of suffering. We all have our own kind of grief. And let me just encourage you to invite Jesus into that place. Doesn't mean things are going to change overnight. Katherine was in rehab for 5 years before she started being able to step out in some new ways. But she stayed faithful. She trusted God's good plan for her life all along the way. And now he is using her and her husband Jay and their family to do some very, very exceptional things. And he can do very exceptional things through your life as you invite Jesus in. So if you have been encouraged by our conversation today, I want to encourage you to rate and review Made to Advance. That helps us get the word out about the podcast. It also helps us get more great guests like Katherine. This has been a production of Engedi Church. We've got more incredible conversations on the way. And so until next time, just know God made you to advance.